Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Remco Fischer, and I lead on the climate change activities of UNEP Finance Initiative. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. I'm very happy that there are so many of you here today with us. And I'm also very happy that I have the chance now to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Janos Pasztor, who has recently been appointed UN Assistant Secretary General on climate change in the Executive Office of Ban Ki-moon here in New York. Mr. Pasztor has dedicated his career to date to building and advancing those agendas and systems at the international level required to deliver environmental sustainability and climate stability. And he has done so in an impressive way. Not only did he contribute to the effort that defined and conceptualized the very term sustainable development, this was the so-called Brundtland Commission, he was also instrumental in setting the agenda on energy and the atmosphere, climate change basically, at the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development, the so-called Earth Summit. It was at that Earth Summit that the foundations were laid for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, the body or the mechanism now in charge, and that has been in charge of the multilateral negotiations on climate change, and that is tasked this year with delivering a new global climate deal at sufficient level of ambition in Paris at COP21. So it's unsurprising that after the Earth Summit, Mr. Pasztor went on to help set up, build, and advance that very UNFCCC. In the course of his career, Mr. Pasztor has held many more important positions, including being the Executive Secretary of Ban Ki-moon's High-Level Panel on Global Sustainability and the Policy and Science Director at the World Wildlife Fund. But now his focus is back again on the UN process on climate change, on helping to ensure that COP21 is a success, and on ultimately ensuring that the world's response to the challenge is appropriate and effective. We all know that, and this is why we're here today, that rechanneling investment flows in the economy at sufficient scale needs to be part of that effective response, global response, and therefore we know that institutional investors will be critical actors. This is the topic of today's meeting. And therefore, I don't think there's any one better person, especially from the UN, to be addressing this audience yourselves today. So please, therefore, join me in welcoming Mr. Janos Pasztor onto the podium.
Thank you. I think we have some serious issues of expectation management here. Anyway, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's actually very exciting. And I heard before the coffee that if you work on 0.1% of the assets that you hold, you can deliver 100 billion toward green investments. What about 100%? Wouldn't that be amazing? That's what we're looking for. But anyway, I'd like to share with you a few words this afternoon. And of course, I do that from the context that I work in. My job is to support the Secretary General in all his activities on climate change, and he has many. He definitely has this as a key priority of his work. He has had that ever since he started 7, 8 years ago, and it's in that capacity. And most recently, of course, the major summit that he organized, I'll come to that in a moment, that defined a lot of the relationships that we've been working on and what we're trying to achieve, and of course how that summit will lead us to hopefully a successful event in Paris in 2015. So it's in that context that I will share a few remarks. And basically, my objective is threefold. First of all, I'd like to recall this very inspiring summit and the commitments that have been made by the private sector. That's number one. The number two is to emphasize the importance of climate risk to investors and address the issue of decarbonization. And thirdly, make the case, or at least contribute to making the case, the economic case, for a 2015 international climate change agreement. And for that, I'd like to share with you 6 key messages up front, and then I'll go in a little bit into the detail of those key messages. The first one is that Climate change poses enormous risks to economic growth and development, but they can only be addressed if we have the solutions meet jointly economic goals, but also growth, job creation, energy security, food security, quality of life, and climate adaptation. We cannot separate the two. And we need to set up joint goals. That's the second point, joint goals to achieve joint economic and climate goals. And these can be done. They're being done in many places already. So we need to learn from them and do more of that. And an important focus of that is on financing for investment and decarbonization of assets. The third is that commitments that are made must be implemented. Even if those commitments are voluntary, they are made there has to be some accountability. Decarbonization has been an important deliverable of the summit, and the Secretary General is keen to translate the announcements into reality. The fourth is that we need to engage other sectors. It is critical that these other sectors understand the positive implications of decarbonizing portfolios from the institutional investors. The fifth one is about Paris. It should be a watershed in these discussions. And the key economic insight is that we need to shape the expectations of investors. It's about solutions that reduce cost of capital and increase profits. And this is why a good international agreement in Paris in 2015 is so important, so that we can choose our economic future. And the sixth point is we, the Secretary General of the United Nations and the team supporting him, we're ready to support you, all of you in this room, to assist in any way we can to assist overcoming regulatory and other barriers so that we can go from the 0.1% to the 100%. So 2014 was the hottest year on record. And 14 out of the 15 hottest years this century were here, and we only had 15 years so far in this century, so that's pretty bad. And just recently I saw a report which indicated that it looks like 2015 will be even hotter than 2014 in terms of long-term predictions. So it's warming up. And greenhouse gas concentrations are the highest levels since 800,000 years. This is pretty serious. And without getting into the details, but we've seen the impacts on all over the world. We have strongest storms hitting the Philippines, the widest tornado ever seen in the United States, extreme droughts in Africa, Brazil, Australia, floods in Pakistan. And of course, we can't say that these are all because of the climate change, but it's pretty clear that with climate change, we'll have more of these. And of course, there are other signs less visible perhaps than the weather. But if you go up to Antarctica, and I had the opportunity to do that with the Secretary General a few years ago, 6 years ago now, or 5 years ago, and you can see the impacts today. It's amazing. Now, these impacts that we are seeing, we're measuring today, they are really the indicators of the urgency of the task ahead. Scientific and policy analysis suggests that climate change will set development into reverse. And it's already happening in many places. In many countries, governments are already acting to offset the growing cost of adaptation and insurance against disasters. From Denmark to Costa Rica, real-world success stories are emerging. For example, Denmark has committed to a fossil fuel-free economy by 2050 and promoted economic growth that is decoupled from emissions. Costa Rica, a middle-income country, the middle-income developing country, has set itself on a path of climate neutrality by 2021. That's actually not too far ahead. These are just two examples of the growing trust in investment shifting from the brown to the green economy. We need to anchor these trends into economic decision-making at a global scale. Actions will be required from across the finance industry to realize this shift. There will be leaders, early movers, some of those are here in this room, and there will be followers in this transition. Also, we need to have better understanding of the so-called carbon bubble, which suggests that more than half of the market capitalization of oil and gas companies is at risk. At the United Nations, we know that asset holders and asset managers assembled in this meeting here at Columbia University know what is at stake. The risks of delaying action are becoming increasingly clear. Policymakers and now even central banks are waking up to the fact that much of the world's oil, coal, and gas reserves will have to remain in the ground. In September 2014, as I already alluded to early on, the UN Secretary-General convened a summit on climate change in New York, bringing together leaders from government, business, finance, and civil society to show how climate action is not only compatible with, but can support countries' core economic and social goals. The climate summit has given birth to a new momentum, as well as new coalition of actors on climate finance. Leaders from governments, the investment community, and financial institutions announced at this summit that they will mobilize hundreds of billions of dollars for financing low-carbon and climate-resilient pathways. These included, and I just give you a few numbers, some of which have already been mentioned, but the coalition of institutional investors has committed to decarbonize $100 billion and to measure and disclose the carbon footprint of at least 500 billion in assets under management. The major pension funds from North America and Europe announced that they would accelerate their investment in low-carbon investments across asset classes up to more than 31 billion by 2020. Commercial banks will provide 30 billion in new climate finance by the end of 2015, that's this year, by issuing green bonds and other innovative financing initiatives. National, bilateral, and regional development banks of the International Development Finance Club, IDFC, announced that they are on track to increase their direct green climate financing to 100 billion a year for new climate finance activities by the end of 2015. And the insurance industry has committed to double its green investment to 82 billion by the end of 2015, and announced it would increase the amount placed in climate-smart investments to 10 times the current amount by 2020. So this shows that action is possible, but we need a lot more of this. The UN is also leading by example. The UN Pension Fund committed capital to help back 2 low-carbon exchange-traded funds, ETFs. And in this post-summit phase, implementation of the climate finance commitments will be important, as well as broadening of the coalition of finance actors. And the SG, the Secretary General, is prepared to engage as necessary in the run-up to COP21 to make this happen and to make it successful. We see broadly 3 work streams ahead of the Secretary General that we need to do. First, in the area of banking, looking into new investments pipeline for both the public and private sector on core priority issues in climate finance, such as renewable energy, resilience, transport, cities, and leveraging private sector finance. The second on insurance, with the focus on doubling of climate-smart investments for tackling climate risk and resilience. And thirdly, on institutional investors, mobilizing financial markets to catalyze economic decarbonization. The Decarbonization Initiative that is subject to discussion in this seminar today was also launched at the summit last year by the Portfolio Decarbonization Coalition, the PDC. Since September, the PDC has already grown from 2 investor members to 7. Let's hope that we get some more. This is good progress, but there is really a lot of work ahead of us in the coming months in order to meet the goal set by pension funds at the summit of covering 100 billion in financial assets. The Secretary General expects that bottom-up initiatives such as the PDC will create an enabling environment towards a meaningful and ambitious climate agreement at the Conference of the Parties in Paris in December. As the United Nations, we welcome asset owners and managers to become members of the PDC so as to share with the public and world governments their approaches, their methodologies, examples, challenges, and successes. And then we hope that the PDC will then be able to make this wealth of action visible to governments in the lead up to COP21 in Paris. We need this for many reasons, to show what's possible, but it's also to help the negotiators to realize that it is possible, what they're trying to negotiate, it's actually possible out there in real life. One of the key economic insights to emerge from the Secretary General's Climate Summit has been the importance of changing the expectation of investors. We are confident that the incoming COP presidency, France, is undertaking steps to not only secure more commitments from the private sector, but also assist you in overcoming the regulatory barriers such as improving risk valuation, domestic regulation, as well as credit ratings. The Paris Agreement should send a signal that these rules and regulations, which support a high-carbon economic paradigm, will need to be changed if we wish to move towards a low-carbon and resilient world. And more importantly, the climate change agreement in Paris must send an unambiguous signal to the world's businesses and investors that the global economy is only going in one direction, the direction of gradual reduction and eventually the elimination of greenhouse gases. The world actually does not, it has a choice right now. It has a choice to continue on a high carbon growth with all the risks and the costs, or we can go down the path of a climate smart growth, supplying energy for all, food for all, cleaner cities we can live in, and a future for our children we can be proud to leave. It's a choice we cannot delay making. We must make it now. And I think we know which choice we have to make. So let's do it. Let's do it now. Thank you.